Welcome to part 2 of our series on indoor air quality. In part 1, we talked about what makes your indoor air quality bad and why this matters for people with asthma, allergies, and eczema. If you haven't listened to that one yet, I recommend starting there. But if you want to get into it, today we're talking about what you can actually do to improve your indoor air. You get to learn about my favorite thing called Lüften, or house burping as it's called in the US. This series is part of the Exhale Project, a set of 6 evidence-based strategies designed to help people with asthma breathe easier. This podcast supports the last E in Exhale, which is to reduce asthma triggers from indoor environments. As always, I'm Kortney, the patient voice in this duo, and I'm joined by Dr. Payel Gupta, a board-certified allergist and immunologist. This podcast is made in partnership with the Allergy and Asthma Network. Now, let's get to it. You're listening to The Itch, a podcast exploring all things allergy, asthma, and immunology. Let's make that air that we're marinating in a little bit cleaner. So, Dr. G, can we jump into things that people can do?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially as somebody with eczema, allergies of your eyes and nose, and asthma, we really need you in particular, and anyone listening to this episode that has any of these conditions to really think about their environment and to make sure that that's not playing an additional role in making their chronic conditions worse. What I want to start off with is ventilation. So we started the episode with that concept that you had brought up, the house burping. And what does that really mean? And so this idea is actually really well supported in science. So Lüften, I hope I'm saying that right. That practice is really fully opening your windows for about 5 to 10 minutes. 2 to 3 times a day, okay? And then you shut them. And that really helps to change the air in the environment and really reventilate it, okay? And there's an even more intense version of this, which I cannot pronounce, but maybe you can. And that's the translation of it is called shock ventilation. And that's when you open the windows in opposite directions, right? So you're really doing that cross ventilation. So if you have 2 windows open, one on one side of the room and another on the other side of the room, then there's that cross draft where the air can really circulate from one side to the other and be pushed out on one end and out on the other, and you're going to refresh the air that's inside. So those are things that you can do to help clean out the air in your home.
That's great. Yeah, I definitely did that this morning. I walked into the kitchen and I was like, oh man, we need to Durchzug. And basically I went in, I opened one window in my office, I opened the other window in the kitchen, and that causes this like kind of breeze throughout the whole house. I find it's faster, especially when it's super cold out right now. We just go bam really fast in the morning, and then I generally do it one more time at lunch. I don't do it 3 times a day, but I try to do it twice a day. So I am a huge fan of ventilation, and if I come to your house and open up all your windows, you understand why now. My family's gotten used to it, and now they do it too, but it was a weird thing. I knew I was becoming a little bit more German when I would go into people's houses and just start opening windows.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's actually a great practice that you've introduced for your family too. And the other important thing is when I was reading up about this is you really want to fully open the windows for a short burst. And that's when you really completely exchange the stale indoor air with the fresh outdoor air. So keeping your window open a little bit all day actually doesn't create that same indoor air refreshing that we get when we really open all of the windows for that 5 to 10 minutes and let the air really get exchanged. So it's really doing that whole process that's important. And what that does is it removes the VOCs that we talked about. It reduces the humidity inside, which we'll talk about why that's important. And it can reduce that carbon dioxide that we had mentioned with the gas stoves, and it dilutes any allergen particles that also might be floating around. It really just helps dilute the air and make it a little bit cleaner.
Dr. G, I have a question for you because I still Luft during pollen season, and I don't really change my practice, to be honest with you, but it always makes me a little stressed out because I know that pollen is floating around outside and I don't want that to come in. Do you have any tips on when to Luft during pollen season?
Yeah, so during pollen season, the pollen counts are actually lower early in the morning or after the rain. You might want to consider lufting during those times. And if the pollen counts are really, really high, you may want to opt just not to luft that particular day. And we can also think about using an air purifier instead on those days. And so we can talk about that next.
Yeah, that's great. I would love to get into air purifiers. I feel like that's the next best thing to lufting if you don't like opening your windows. Or if you don't have windows that open fully. Because some apartments, my first apartment, I could only crack it about 4 or 5 inches. So I couldn't luft. That wouldn't have been something possible.
Here's my honest take on air purifiers. Number one, you have to have an air purifier with a HEPA filter. What does it mean to have a HEPA filter? So, HEPA stands for high efficiency particulate air. When you have a true HEPA filter, it's supposed to capture 99.97% of particles that are zero point 0.3 micrometers or larger. So, it would help with the PM 2.5 that we've been talking about, and it would help to reduce that. However, it wouldn't help with things like dust mite allergen, for example. Dust mite droppings, which is what we're allergic to, are actually heavier and they settle and they're not really in the air. And so the HEPA filter can't really get rid of those. And we'll talk about how you can get rid of the dust mite allergen a little bit later. But these filters can help again with pollen, pet dander, mold spores, because those are lighter and in the air, and it can help reduce the PM 2.5 levels.
Dr. G, what about those chemicals that you've mentioned that are in our air as well? Do air purifiers help with those?
So here's the thing, HEPA filters are great for catching particles, but they won't remove gases or those volatile organic compounds or the VOCs that we've talked about. For that, you need what's called an activated carbon filter. So if you're worried about chemical irritants from cleaning products or off-gassing furniture or candles, then you really want something that has both a HEPA filtration system and a carbon filtration system.
Great. So you need two things. You need the HEPA, which catches the particles, and you need the carbon, which catches the chemicals. So you want both to cover all bases.
Exactly. And the other thing to know is that air purifiers only clean the air of the room that they're in, and you have to make sure that you get the right size for your room. So it's kind of like an air conditioner. I feel like people might be used to those a little bit more. When you get an air conditioner, if the air conditioner is too small, it's not going to cool the whole room, right? And it's the same thing here. If the air purifier is too small, it's really not going to clean the air in the whole room. And so you want to look for something that's called a CADR rating. So that stands for clean air delivery rate, and make sure that that matches your room size. And that's just really important to make sure that you're actually getting effective filtration of the large room that you might be trying to improve the air quality in.
Thank you for mentioning that. I think that's really important to note that you can't just buy any old air purifier because it might not actually be really doing its job if it's too small for the room that you've put it in. So we've talked about how to get stuff out of our air. And I would like to know, since we're talking about kind of cleaning air, what about cleaning products? Because I am now thinking about every cleaning product I have is very strong smelling. And I'm worried that that's probably a problem. So what about cleaning products?
Yeah, for people with asthma or allergies, choosing the right products that you're cleaning your home with is really important. So, number one, you always want to choose fragrance free, unscented products, and you want to avoid aerosol sprays. They can be especially irritating, and you don't want to use air fresheners or those plug in air fresheners that used to be so popular in the 80s and 90s. One thing that you could do, and a lot of people have turned to, is actually making your own cleaners with vinegar, baking soda, and water. And when you do clean, you also want to make sure that you open the windows for that ventilation, and consider wearing an N95 mask that we all got really used to during the COVID-19 pandemic. That can be really helpful, especially for people with allergies of the nose, because cleaning and getting all of that dust into the air, that can all then enter into our system through the nose and the mouth. And that can really cause a lot of irritation and discomfort for people with allergies and asthma.
You can tell that I've been cleaning the house because I'm like all sneezy and stuff like that. And I've used up all my masks. So I'm just like not breathing while cleaning, which is probably a terrible thing. So I have to get my act in order. Honestly, this is why we do the podcast, guys, so I can get myself sorted. So thank you, Dr. G, for reminding me and the audience.
Yeah. And, it is hard to understand that cleaning products could actually make your air worse, but they can. And the EPA actually has a safer choice list of cleaning products that we can link to in the show notes. And no matter what cleaning products, especially if you're using something like bleach, you want to make sure that you're appropriately diluting that chemical too. Because a lot of times I've gone into homes where somebody's cleaning, or even offices where somebody's cleaning, and I've had to let the cleaning person know that it's really important for their health to be appropriately diluting the chemicals that they're using, because I can just tell that the smell is so strong that it's almost instantly giving me a headache. So I can't imagine being around that all day as somebody that's a cleaning person. So it's really important, especially for people that are around these chemicals often, to think about the choices of the chemicals that you're using. And then if you don't have a choice on the chemicals that you're using because you're employed by somebody, you want to make sure that you're diluting that chemical in a way that makes it safer also.
Yeah, and taking the safety precautions of wearing mask and maybe gloves as well, so that you know that you're keeping your health as safe as possible, controlling what you can control, right? So we've talked about kind of generic cleaning. What about if we go room by room? Because you mentioned dust mites, and I feel like we should enter the bedroom. And how can we impact our indoor air for the bedroom?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we go room by room, there are certain things that we want to think about. So starting with the bedroom, which is where we're spending a lot of our time if we're getting those 7 to 8 hours of sleep that we should. And there, really, we want to concentrate on the dust mites. And so when we're thinking about dust mites, these are tiny living creatures, and we're not allergic to the mite itself, but we're allergic to the poop or the droppings. And I've mentioned that several times on several of our podcasts. And they actually live in our bedding, carpets, and upholstered furnitures, and they feed off of the dead skin cells that we shed. And so that's why they're in those spaces more. And the second thing is not only do they eat dead skin cells, but they also drink from the environment. So the more humid an environment is, the more nourishment they're actually getting. So that's their water. In environments that are really dry, like Arizona, for example, they don't really have dust mites as an allergen that affects people there. What we want to keep the humidity levels at is around 30 to 50% in the home. And that's kind of the sweet spot where the dust mites don't have enough to drink in the air, and where it's humid enough for our skin and for us not to get super dry, and also so that the mold doesn't increase in our home. So mold is another thing that lives off of the humidity in the air. You want to target your humidity levels again at 30 to 50%, and you can get a really cheap humidity meter to monitor the humidity levels. So if it's really dry and not humid enough, that can be bad for people with eczema. You can add humidity in the air with humidifiers, but again, you want to be careful with the humidifiers because we want to make sure that we're keeping those devices clean and make sure that there isn't mold growth, because you are heating up water. And so the inside of that container can get really moldy. So I always opt for humidifiers that have clear containers where you're putting the water so that you can look out for any mold growth that might be present.
We've had mold problems in the past in my house. That's why I became so obsessed with lüfting in the first place. And I just was wondering, so with the dust mites, Dr. G, we've talked about them in the past, and I'd love if we could just quickly go over a few things that we can do to make sure that we're not like breathing in poo all night. So what can you do to help make sure that you lower the dust mite stuff in your air?
As we mentioned, they're in the upholstered furniture, carpeting, and bedding. And so bedding is the one thing that we do have control over. To get rid of the dust mite droppings and the dust mites themselves, you really have to use hot water, not cold water or lukewarm water. And you want to do that at least once a week. Ideally, you want to make sure that there isn't too much carpet in the room if that's possible. You want to make sure if you have kids that you don't have a bunch of stuffed animals, because stuffed animals can also harbor a lot of those dust mites and cause issues. And the other tip that I always like to give people for the bedroom is that you want to make sure that you change your clothes before you hop into bed, because your clothes can also track in pollen from the outdoors and some of those other particulate matter 10 that we talked about that can track in from your shoes or your clothes. And so you want to make sure, again, that you keep your bedroom free of those things. So you want to change your clothes, ideally even shower before you go to bed. The pollen can also cling to your hair, which can then cause allergens to come into your bedroom. And then also when you're cleaning, you want to make sure that you're using a damp cloth when you're wiping surfaces and that you're also mopping. So just taking a dry broom and getting rid of the dust is not enough. You really want to pick up those particles, and that's the way that you can really get rid of them. And lastly, there are so many recommendations for dust mites. Sorry, I didn't realize that, but you also want to get out of the environment that you've just cleaned for at least 20 minutes to 2 hours. And that's really to let the dust settle, so to speak. And so when you're cleaning, as we mentioned, you're really picking up all of those things and putting them into the air. And that's how they can get into your eyes and nose and airways, wearing the mask, maybe even wearing goggles while you're cleaning if it really affects your eyes. But then also just getting out of the environment for 20 minutes to 2 hours to let everything settle down. And so it's not in the air as much.
Dr. G, there's one thing that you didn't mention that I know you've definitely mentioned in previous episodes, which is dust mite covers.
Yeah. And so dust mite covers are available really for all parts of the bed, including like the duvet cover, the pillows, the mattress, all of that. What I really want for people to be aware of is that the dust mite covers help prevent the dust mites from burrowing into the surface that you're trying to protect and pooping inside of that surface. So again, we're allergic to the droppings, right? What we want to do with dust mite covers is prevent the dust mites from burrowing in and creating a big mess inside of these things. If you can't get dust mite covers because they can be expensive for everything, the area that I want you to focus on is the pillows, because that's really where your face is all night. And so what you want to do is make sure that your pillows aren't super old. If you haven't changed your pillows in a while, you could wash them the way that they're recommended to be washed or dry cleaned, and really make sure that they're dried appropriately. But when you do buy the new pillows or wash them, then you can put the dust mite covers on and make sure that those dust mite covers are protecting the pillow. And then on top of that, you would put the pillow case, and that's what you would wash on a weekly basis, is the pillow cover itself and not necessarily the dust mite cover.
Oh, great. So you don't have to wash the two things. You can just wash the pillow cover because that's basically just like your pillow now. Okay, that's great. And I know that the other thing that you always say, and I don't listen to it, is not have your pet in the bedroom because they love to track in pollen. And I know I've seen some hilarious videos online of people freaking out about wearing outdoor jeans on the bed, but then in the same video their dog jumps on the bed and then like plays around on their pillows, and then they like cut to a shot of the dog also playing around in the dirt outside and how that dirt just basically got on your pillow. So if you don't know why you don't want to have the pet in the bedroom, that's pretty much why. Right, Dr. G?
Absolutely. And, you know, like you, people are allergic to their pets but want to deny it. Especially if you have a pet allergy and you have a pet, you want to make sure that your bedroom is safe for you as much as possible, right? So that's the one area that you can keep as a safe zone, especially again, because we're spending so much time in the bedroom.
And I know that we've said we would kind of go room to room, but we talked about dusting. What about vacuuming? Do you have any like awesome tips on how to make sure that your vacuuming is better?
Yeah. So this isn't necessarily just for the bedroom, but yeah, vacuuming is super important. So important things to remember about the vacuum is that it can actually also have a HEPA filtration system. If you have a vacuum, ideally it has a HEPA filter in it, which will catch those particles more and really do a better job cleaning. But if you don't, that's okay. You can still vacuum and then again, wet mop after, which may help really pick up the particles that might not have been picked up by your vacuum.
Okay, last question, and then we can move into the next room. As you can see, if you're watching, I've got lots of plants, and I've read that plants can help purify the air. Is that true?
So plants can help keep our environment clean. So they do this by a process called photosynthesis, which might bring back memories of science class in grade school. But essentially, they absorb the carbon dioxide that we had talked about earlier and they release oxygen into the air. They may also remove volatile organic compounds like benzene or formaldehyde through the leaves and the roots and the soil that has microorganisms in it. They can help in certain ways, but the one thing that you have to be aware of is that plants can actually also create mold. So the soil can get moldy, and some people can be super sensitive and allergic to that source of mold growth. So instead of worrying about the potential for mold, we say that keeping plants out of the bedroom might be the best option. But I definitely have a lot of plants inside my living room and around my house. And so I love plants too. And I do think that they do a lot of good. You just have to be a little bit cautious about the potential for mold.
Thank you, Dr. G. And also, I dust my plants once a month because my plants love to collect dust. So that's just another tip. So we've talked a lot about cleaning tips and the bedroom. And I'm assuming that with the living room, it's very similar to the bedroom, that there aren't any specific things in the living room. Is that right?
Yeah, the living room is similar to the bedroom. You want to make sure that there aren't too many upholstered things, so limit the amount of pillows that you might have on the couch. You want to opt for an area rug as opposed to having carpeting throughout if that's possible, and doing all of the same cleaning measures like vacuuming with a HEPA filter, making sure you do a wet cloth when you're dusting and mopping. So I think the living room is very similar to the bedroom and the things that we want to think about as we're keeping that area clean. The next room that I want to talk about is the bathroom. These spaces are prime locations for mold. And that's because, the bathroom especially can get, when you shut the door and you're taking a warm shower or a hot shower that some people like, that can really cause a lot of humidity in that environment. One thing that you want to do is you want to have the exhaust fan running because that takes that humid air and it picks it up and it keeps that bathroom from getting too humid, and that can help prevent the mold growth. And you want to run it for about 15 to 20 minutes after you shower also to really clear that moisture out. You also want to check for leaks regularly, like under the sink, behind the toilet, and then in the kitchen. You want to check around the refrigerator to make sure that there aren't any leaks that you aren't aware of, because that can also cause mold growth. And then the shower curtain is another area that can get really moldy. And so you want to make sure that you're checking that regularly and changing that out if it does get moldy, or you can spray it with a vinegar solution that I had mentioned earlier to help prevent mold growth. You want to make sure that you open it up and spread it out so that the moisture doesn't stick in the folds and cause that mold growth also. So those are all little things that you can do to keep your environment free of mold.
Well, we've gone through a lot of tips, and I just want to summarize kind of like the big thing that I'm going to remember. What you want to make sure of is that your house is as dust free as possible and as humid free as possible. But when I say humid free, I mean the humidity level between 30 and 50. And when it comes to your bathroom and your kitchen, any place that can be kind of wetty, you want to make sure that it doesn't stay wet where mold can grow. So that's basically the big overall tips that I'm taking away from what you told us so far, Dr. G.
Yep, exactly. And one thing that I didn't mention in the kitchen was I mentioned exhaust fans in the bathroom and how they can help, but exhaust fans in the kitchen can also help with some of that air ventilation, right? Removing the air that might be coming off of the gas stove. And it's not going to clean the air like a HEPA filter, but it can help circulate the air, right? And take it out of your home a little bit more. And so that's also something that if you still have a gas stove and you can't get rid of it, you can turn on the ventilation, the exhaust fan, if you have that. And then again, doing the lüfting and then using a HEPA filtration and a carbon filtration system as much as possible also.
Thank you, Dr. G. So that's our house, and that's an environment that we can control, more or less. What about places that we spend indoors that we can't control? And I'm thinking schools and I'm thinking offices. So, what can we do there, Dr. G, to make sure that the air that we're breathing is as unpolluted as possible?
So that is a tough one, right? Because as you said, we don't have as much control over that. And the average school building in the US is actually 44 years old. And about a third of schools have been found to have inadequate ventilation, unfortunately. So for kids with asthma and allergies, this can be a real problem. And if you notice that the symptoms are worse when they get to school and they get better when they're at home, then there might be something in their environment that we need to look into. You can talk to your child's school nurse or the administration, ask about the ventilation system and whether they use the high filtration systems that are available. And then there's also something helpful that the EPA has created, and it's called the Indoor Air Quality Tools for Schools Action Kit. It's a free tool that you can actually share with your school if they're not familiar with it. There's some helpful tips that they might be able to take away from that and improve the air quality in the school. And lastly, you can advocate. You can join the Parent Teacher Association, connect with other parents whose kids have allergies and asthma, and troubleshoot and see what things you can help the school improve on, because that is hard and it really depends on the funding that the school has and all of those kind of things. But a good group of parents that are advocating can really make a difference.
Yes, I can totally attest to the power of parents because my mom was one of those parents when I was a kid, and she made sure that our school was a safe place for me to be in. And the one other thing I would say that I've seen a lot is to make sure that the windows are closed like before and after school because of school bus idling. I've heard that's a big thing.
That's a great point. School bus idling, that creates a lot of fumes, right? That creates a lot of PM 2.5 because essentially cars produce combustion. It's an engine that's producing heat and it's releasing the chemicals into the air. And so that's why it's really important to not have the windows open, as you mentioned, because then all of that polluted air will come into the school, especially when the school buses are what we call idling or having their engines turned on, even though they're not moving. That's why there's this big push of turning off the engine when the school bus is waiting, as opposed to keeping it on. So that's also something easy that you could potentially advocate for if the school buses in your area don't do that already.
Great. Thank you, Dr. G. That feels like something a parent can actually go out and do, and it doesn't feel too overwhelming. What about the workplace?
So, similar thing, if you notice that your symptoms get worse at work and are better when you get home, then there might be some detective work that you need to look into. Is there something in the workplace that's causing you to have these symptoms? So, does a coworker like candles? Do you have a candle that you weren't aware of that you might have gotten gifted or bought? You want to look at your environment in the workplace. You want to look at your office and see, is there anything that could be contributing to poor air quality? And then you also can ask your workplace for reasonable accommodations, like being moved away from a coworker, for example, that wears heavy perfume, or you can buy a portable air purifier that you can use in that environment that again is big enough to actually filter the air that you need it to filter. And then there's something called OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And that is a group that thinks about the air quality and the occupational safety for people in their workplace. And they say that more than half of the indoor air quality complaints involve faulty ventilation. So it is a common problem. And that's a tough one, right? Because installing a really expensive filtration system is not something that every workplace can do. And so, again, there might be certain things like maybe you can start lüfting in your office. Maybe there's a way to produce cross ventilation for those 2 to 3 times a day that can help move the air and keep the air clean. And again, if you're working in an office space that you think that you could buy an air purifier for, consider investing in a HEPA and carbon filtration air purifier system for that space if it's really something that's affecting your health.
I think a lot of people don't realize that they can advocate for themselves in the workplace. So just remember that your health is important, and your employer is supposed to create a safe environment for you to work in. So don't be afraid to speak up, because good air quality impacts you and your boss. So you want to remind them that they're also sitting in a nasty little space. That was a lot, Dr. G. And I feel like I'm about to go give my house a good clear down of scented candles and wiping stuff down with wet cloths. So can you just give us a really quick overview of what the audience should be taking away from today's episode so they don't go home and feel paralyzed by where they need to start?
Absolutely. Again, there's nothing to get scared of. These are small changes that you can make and incrementally add on things that you can do. But I think if you're going to focus on a few things, here's where I'd start. Number one, again, control the humidity in the air. So we want to keep it at 30 to 50%. This helps with dust mites, it helps with mold, and it helps with overall comfort in your home. Number two, ventilation is important. So you can do things like lüfting, which is totally free and easy to do. Get that air exchange going at least 2 to 3 times a day in your home. Number three, for the dust mites, which we talked about a lot, we want to do those simple dust mite measures like washing the sheets in hot water, dusting with a wet cloth as opposed to a dry cloth, and then making sure that the cleaning products that you're using are fragrance free, that you're not using air fresheners and candles. And lastly, we want to invest in an air purifier if you can, and make sure it does have a true HEPA filter, and consider one with a carbon filter too.
Thank you so much, Dr. G. And thank you so much for making lüfting a doctor-approved activity that I can go and make my whole family do from now on. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate this episode so much. And again, we're going to have a ton of links in the show notes, so go grab those there.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Remember that all information you hear today is for informational purposes only and are not intended to serve as a substitute for the consultation, diagnosis, and/or medical treatment of a qualified physician or healthcare provider. And also, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. And if you have a second, help spread the word by rating our podcast and sharing with your friends and family who might also be interested in learning more about allergies, asthma, and immunology. You can always stay up to date by checking out our Instagram, The Itch Podcast, where you can leave questions you are itching to know, or check out our website, which is www.itchpodcast.com, which contains more information about the subjects we covered in today's episode and every episode. Until next time, have a fabulous week.